Good morning, folks. So we're getting started here. We're going to go ahead and open this presentation up. And Terry, are you able to see the presentation? Hello, Terry. Can you hear me?
It's all good on this end, Randy. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry,
good, Randy. Sorry.
That's all right. No. Again, good morning, folks. And we're so excited to be able to come to you and talk about engaging partners and students in the juvenile justice system. This is something that myself and Kimberly Gerlach, my colleague, are very excited about to present to you. So we hope that this is something that's a benefit to you. And also, too, as Terry mentioned, we're going to be doing an afternoon session on what we're calling returning citizens at the adult system. So there's going to be some crossover as we're doing our presentation. So please, if you like what you hear, as Terry mentioned, we'd love to be able to hear or see you this afternoon in our afternoon session as well. So let's go ahead and get started. And again, my name is Randy Loss, and I have almost 30 years of experience in the VR system. Started off as a job coach, worked as a supports coordinator of basic case management for those with intellectual disabilities. And I was in the Pennsylvania State VR system for about 16 years. I'm now with the Pennsylvania Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. And what I do there is I'm the employment lead for our state agency. So being able to help persons with mental illness, with serious emotional disturbances for those that are youth, being able to help them find their pathway towards a career path, whether it be through supported education or supported employment. So I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Gerlach. I have been with the PA OVR for a little over 7 years now. I am currently the statewide lead for the Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services and also for the adult reentry.
Thank you, Kimberly. And our objectives for today, participants will learn about examples of state-level practices serving students and youth involved in the juvenile justice system. Also, we'll look at ways for participants to provide WIOA Pre-ETS services to adjudicated and delinquent students and youth. Additionally, we'll also be able to work with you to allow you to know of collaboration partners needed to connect students and youth to employment supports and resources. And lastly, we'll help you to have tools to reach out to systems which actively support the needs of students and youth in the juvenile justice system. So, Terry, if you wouldn't be so kind, well, actually, I'll turn it over to Kimberly. You want to take this from here?
So our first poll question today is, what percentage of your caseloads have justice-involved students or youth? A, is it 0 to 20? Is your caseload 21 to 40, 41 to 60, or is your caseload over 60%?
And we'll leave the question up for about a minute or two. It looks like people are actively filling it, so thank you very much. And it looks like 0 to 20 is the in the lead right now.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll give folks about another 30 to 40 seconds to answer that. It's almost like we should be playing the Double to Jeopardy music in the background while we're waiting for this poll to finish. So we'll wait about another 10 seconds. It looks like some people are still filling in. All right, it looks like the answer for most folks is 0 to 20%. It looks like around the other 10% of individuals have a higher caseload, but it looks like many people maybe either have random experiences with youth and students who have a juvenile delinquent background, or maybe not at all. So hopefully this is helpful information. It's helpful to us to know, okay, what is our audience's knowledge of this population to be able to move forward and help you understand the needs, help you understand who are partners. So moving on to the next slide. There we go. Sorry about that. Juvenile justice system considerations. Now, this is information that we were able to get from the state of North Carolina. And this was a very good document in regards to considerations for future employment for those students, those youth that are in the juvenile justice system. Now, this might not be the case for every state, but this, I think, is a good guide in regards to what are the things that you as a VR counselor, if you're working with an individual who has involvement in the juvenile justice system or had it in the past, what are the kinds of things that you need to keep in mind when helping them to facilitate finding employment. So again, first, juvenile records are not automatically available to the public. Usually those are things that are expunged. Once the person has been left the system, usually the juvenile justice record gets expunged. But keep in mind, employers, about 90% of employers these days do background checks. Excuse me, a lot of the individual or the employers that don't do background checks are more the mom and pops organizations, but a lot of the larger employers, most employers, around 89 to 90% do background checks. So when they're doing background checks, they conduct fingerprint checks, which can identify delinquency history. And again, for the purposes of helping the person explain their way, explain their situation to a potential employer, a juvenile record is not a criminal record. So that's something that employers need to be aware of. So if you can help educate the employer that juvenile records are not criminal records, if they've been only adjudicated and not experienced an adult crime, been in the adult system, just the adjudicated system, the juvenile system, they do not have a criminal record. So helping employers understand that is critical. And another point to consider, again, this is not the case in every state, but in North Carolina, just as an example, the adjudications are considered criminal offenses for purposes of military recruitment. I know in Pennsylvania, that's not necessarily the case. I know there are facilities that Kimberly and I have worked with that do have the military come and actively recruit potential soldiers at facilities that are in the juvenile justice system. So not every state does this, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind when you're working with a person and helping them figure out their future. And lastly, employers can ask about whether applicants have ever been arrested. Technically, in North Carolina, juveniles are arrested. So again, an arrest notice versus a conviction are two different things, but in the juvenile justice system, even though it's adjudication, it's not a criminal conviction. If there's an arrest record, it'll show up. So again, doing your homework with the individual to make sure that you know what their history is going to show, what is going to happen in regards to trying to make applications for jobs is going to be very important. And system definitions, juvenile versus adult. So I have italicized the juvenile side and then versus the adult side. So adjudicatory hearings instead of trials. So they still go in court, they still go before a judge, but it's a hearing instead of a trial. Adjudicated rather than convicted. Again, they're not punished. It's not a punishment. It's not a crime when they're adjudicated. Delinquent instead of guilty. Again, it's meant to be rehabilitative as opposed to punitive. Dispositions instead of sentences, excuse me. Committed instead of incarcerated. And while adults and youth in the adult jails, prisons are either unconvicted, pre-trial, they're waiting for trial, or convicted, they've been through the trial process, they're convicted, they're serving their time. Youth in the juvenile facilities are either detained or committed. So again, this is an important nomenclature in regards to helping people understand what the difference is between the juvenile system, the rehabilitative system, the adjudication system, versus the adult punitive criminal system. So Camila, I'll turn it over to you.
So yes, we have our second polling check question. So nationally, what percentage of adjudicated youth have a disability? Is it 12%, 27%, 33%, or do you think it's higher than 40%?
And we'll take about another 30 seconds, 45 seconds for folks to answer that question.
And I do see a couple of answers coming in the chat box too.
Sure. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll if we can. So it looks like most people, about 80% of the people, said that it was 33% and higher. So actually, if we can close the poll, please. Actually, not sure after the poll it seems to lag, so trying to move this forward. There we go. Actually, youth who are adjudicated, at least 33% are classified with a disability, at least 33%. That was a study that was done back in 2005. And in contrast, in that same study, it said about 12% to 13% of students in regular public schools have identified disabilities. So basically 3 times as much in that study in 2005. But there are a number of reasons that that number can be higher. And so even though it says 33% here, many other studies have shown that it is actually indeed higher. And there are reasons of that. Rates of disability among incarcerated youth are generally estimated between 30 and 80%. So again, it can be very high. And it's dependent upon how the disability is defined. And, you know, is it bad behavior? Is that individual exhibiting bad behavior, or is there really something behind it? So again, it's how a system is looking and defining the individual. It's looking how they're looking at disability. And again, it's very crucial because of that, because it's such a high percentage, up to 80% for the VR professional to be involved to the best degree possible with the juvenile justice system, and to those students and youth that are in these facilities that are under supervision, under juvenile probation. It's also known as being under supervision. So it's very important that you be a partner to help deal with these issues, to address these issues, and be able to help the individual see success. So another statistic we're going to show is youth who are adjudicated, 46% of those diagnosed with a learning disability are attending a special education program while in custody. So again, that's kind of an interesting number because it should be 100% are receiving these services while they're in a custody program, a development facility program. So again, being able to get connected with the programs and help the systems identify how critical disability is to the success of the individual, how disability can play a role in criminal behavior is very important. So again, the juvenile system is about adjudication, is about rehabilitation. Let's work with these systems, and we'll talk about more as we go in various state examples, and especially in Pennsylvania. What we've done in Pennsylvania, what can be done in other states to make connections to be able to address the disability component of what these youth and students are experiencing. And one more statistic, the non-graduate incarceration rate is 63 times higher than among college graduates. And what that basically means is there's no direct link between prison and the decision to leave high school, but it has been shown that dropouts are exposed to many of the same socioeconomic issues that individuals who are incarcerated in the adult system are experiencing. So again, making sure that students don't drop out of school, making sure that they get the education that they need to be successful is so critical. And I know these are staggering statistics, but we just wanted to show you what individuals that are in these systems are facing, so that we can help you to say, yes, we want to be a part of connecting to these systems. And we'll talk more about how you can connect to those systems. Kimberly?
So yeah, so so we've covered a lot of things high level nationally, and now we're going to go into a little bit more specific, a few state examples. So some of the states that we're going to cover today are New York, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Michigan, Montana, and Pennsylvania.
And some of these are just going to be a quick brush over states. What we want to show, as Kimberly mentioned, we're kind of doing a funnel kind of thing. So we're looking at national statistics, national data that speaks to what is the need at the national level. And then we're going to kind of, funnel things in, looking at state examples. Some states just 1 or 2 examples, some states multiple examples. And then we get to Pennsylvania, and we're going to look at a very local level, deep dive type of program that Pennsylvania has been able to develop between its VR program, Pennsylvania OVR, and its juvenile justice system, the Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services. So let's go ahead and look at the New York example. And I'm not sure why it's doing that, but what we were hoping to do was show the New York outline map of New York State and the New York Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. And it kind of, so there we go, Developmental Disabilities Planning Council from New York State. An example of something that can be considered is the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, and every state has a Developmental Disabilities Council. I sat on the Pennsylvania one for 7 years representing OVR. I was actually a council member. And one thing that the Developmental Disabilities Councils are looking for are new projects to fund. They're a granting entity, a federally funded granting entity that's always looking for ways to connect individuals with disabilities more to their community, reduce stigma, deal with such issues such as criminal justice. So this is an example of what New York had done. They developed through a $1.5 million grant, $300,000 a year for 5 years, a sustainable community of practice. Cornell University, shout out to Cornell. What they're doing right now is they're in a process of developing this community of practice in order to build bridges across community organizations, develop best practice guidelines, provide training and information to nonprofits and governmental organizations. And again, the funding source is the New York Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. But again, there's a DD council in every state across the country and the territories. Seek them out if you already don't have a relationship with them, and find out how you could partner with them to look at funding programs and projects that would be dealing with youth with disabilities that are in the juvenile justice system. And what I was hoping to do, sorry, was also show just an example of another state program with North Carolina. The North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities could work with the North Carolina VR program in regards to doing something similar to what's happening in New York State. So moving on, and as you see this screen show up, it's popping up the different logos of the different partners that we're moving from New York State to Oklahoma. And we're talking about the Oklahoma Juvenile Justice Team. Again, this is something that colleagues from the Youth Technical Assistance Center had provided to me. And what we have here is, and the reason I did this is to show like a circle of collaborators that were involved. It takes many partners to be involved to be able to develop a pathway towards success. And what you see here is the Commission on Children and Youth and the Rehabilitation Services, the state VR program, the Office of Juvenile Affairs, Oklahoma State University. A university partner is always very important in regards to getting good data. The Gordon Cooper Technology Center, their Career and Technical Education Center, one of them in Oklahoma. Norman Public Schools, again, having public schools involved is very critical, because being able to successfully make the connection from the juvenile development facilities, which might be somewhere far away from where the individual lives, back to their community, back to their public schools, is critical, because, you know, they may have gotten in trouble while they were in a school, they may have gotten kicked out of the school. How do you have a connector back to see that they successfully get back to the public school and continue education? Department of Human Services, and lastly, Oklahoma Works, so their workforce. And why I bring this model up is the vocational counselor role. Again, you see the first bullet talks a lot about the Pre-ETS, the different services that are known as Pre-ETS. The VR counselor at the local level can provide feedback up to the state team to identify barriers and systemic issues and recommendations to improve. But the bullet that I want to focus in on is this. I think Oklahoma has hit a home run in this regard. They maintain the case, the VR counselor maintains the case even upon release, and provides additional services in the community. So they follow the individual, the life of the case. And I think that's so critical. And I think it's important as a model to be able to consider so that the individual doesn't get lost as they leave the developmental facilities, go back to the communities. There's that connecting thread to help them be successful. Looking at the Michigan Juvenile Justice Resources, one resource is a Michigan Committee on Juvenile Justice, the MCJJ. Now again, I'm going to make a quick note here. This is another federal funding source But from a different perspective, there was the 1974 juvenile justice program that was created at the federal level. And basically, they're a federal funding source to all states and territories. So every state and territory has a organization similar to this Committee on Juvenile Justice in Pennsylvania. It's called the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. And it's a funding source. It promotes reentry/successful transition. And it's a resource for juvenile data trends. It's something that's very important, I think, in regards to being able to partner up with this organization, because you'll see later in the North Carolina discussion, they provide funding. These organizations provide funding to each and every county program that is in regards to helping people reenter into their communities. And they have an adjudicated youth project, which is an interagency initiative. Again, it's something that they reached out to different partners, VR included, and it's intended to develop a seamless transition from the juvenile development facility, from being under supervision of the probation officer to their community. Very critical. It's a transition program of sorts that is on top of transition as we know it from work, school to work. This is a transition from the juvenile justice system to their community. So individuals with disabilities that are in the juvenile justice system have two transition systems, and they need as much assistance as they can to successfully transition from both. Lastly, the Michigan Youth Reentry Model. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I did want to show this because in all three phases that are listed, the VR counselor can be involved, the VR system can be involved, but especially at the bottom in the purple phase 3, number 7, aftercare and discharge. I can't say enough about the VR professional making sure that the individual aftercare, after they leave the development facility, after they leave supervision by the probation officer, to what? To discharge to what? To good supports in VR to help them gain life-sustaining wages, skills that are going to help them for the rest of their life be successful in employment. And lastly, again, I'm talking about a rural state here, Montana Board of Crime Control and their juvenile justice resources. Again, I think it's important. We listed several states that have a mixture of urban and rural, but Montana is especially rural. And I wanted to make sure that we addressed the needs of a rural state. And again, the Montana Board of Crime Control is just like the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency and the Michigan model of juvenile support. And what they have that I think is very important is their alternatives initiative, and it involves 9 core strategies. And first and foremost is collaboration. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Next, data-driven decisions, being able to make sure that the data is speaking to what is helping the person be successful. Alternatives to detention, again, making sure that the individual stays on the street, stays in the community is so critical, because their ability to learn positive behavior is so much more valuable when they're in the community where they grew up, where they learned the bad behaviors. Being able to help them learn appropriate behaviors to counter those negative behaviors in their community is so much more critical than sending them to a development or detention center. Again, another important component, especially now with all that's going on over the past few weeks, reducing racial and ethnic disparities. How do we address that? What are we as organizations doing to step up to address those types of issues that we're currently facing? Because as we know about the criminal justice system, such a high percentage of individuals are minorities, Latinos, African American. So what are we doing to address those disparities? And lastly, reinvestment of detention savings. And the reason I'm bringing that up is we're going to be talking in more deep dive in regards to what Pennsylvania has done for the juvenile justice system to take dollars that they were going to not only not use, but they were going to lose because they were reducing the number of individuals in facilities. But what were they able to do with those savings to be able to use it as a state match to draw down federal VR dollars? We'll talk more about that as the discussion goes over to Kimberly. So let's go ahead and take questions right now. So Heidi, do we have any questions that have been burning for the last few minutes? I know I kind of blew through that, but we wanted to make sure that we had adequate time to get through all the materials and be able to give time and space for deep questions.
Thanks, Randy. I've been keeping an eye on the chat and have been redirecting any of the substantive questions over to the Q&A box. Beth, would you be able to share any questions that we have available right now?
Yeah, we have had a couple of questions that have come in. The first one comes from George, and it says, when working with juvenile offenders in the VR system, is the main issue their offense, or do you work with mostly juveniles with disabilities who commit an offense?
Well, Kimberly, do you care if I answer that question and you maybe take the next question?
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. The answer to the question is both. And it really depends upon the nature of the disability, the severity of the disability, how it's impacting their ability to function. But also, too, where is the criminal justice professional in this equation? Are they in a development facility, used to be called detention centers? Are they out in the community? Is there a juvenile probation officer that's involved? Those are questions that you need to ask of the individual, ask of the families if they're a minor, to be able to find out, what is the whole story? What are all the parts, the moving parts that are in this person's life, to make a determination, okay, while we can help address the disability issue, maybe because of the nature of the offense, if they have like an adult offense, for example, they have a misdemeanor or a felony as an adult, there may be certain professions that they cannot enter into. So having that conversation in the now, rather than saying, well, I want to be this, I want to be like a medical doctor or whatever, and find out because they have drug charges, they can't do that. Those are the kinds of things that you need to ask yourself and ask the individual in regards to, basically doing some good detective work, no pun intended, to be able to find out what is the person's story. How can you unpack what's going on in their life and be able to reach out to professionals that are going to give you the answers. Because again, if you're not sure about a person's adjudication record or their criminal justice record, and we'll talk more about that in the adult version, the probation officer is a great resource. Again, probation officers in the juvenile justice system, they want to see the individual do their best. They want to see the individual stay in a straight and narrow, as it were, be successful, gain a life-sustaining wage. Because again, every condition of supervision that is written for an individual, whether adjudicated or a criminal offense, one of the biggest things is find employment, find a job. And the probation officer, while they're the expert in the criminal justice aspect of the adjudication issues, they're not the expert in employment. And if the person has a disability, they're not the expert in disability. So that's where you can have a good crossover or connect over, is between the probation officer and yourself at the local level on behalf of that individual. So what's the next question?
The next question comes from Byron. It says, how do you think this is associated with the discrimination involved with students with disabilities?
And Kimberly, you want to take that one, or do you want me to try and address that?
Say it again, Beth.
How do you think this is associated with the discrimination involved with students with disabilities?
I guess I would say that I see a lot more of it in the schools and before they get into the juvenile system. I know here in PA, once they get into the juvenile system, they have a better chance at education and they work with them a lot better. I think that in the school systems, I think sometimes they don't have the ability or the know-how to work with this population. But when unfortunately, once they get into the adjudicated system, they have a better knowledge in there of how to work with these kids and how to teach them. I just don't think that they sometimes get the appropriate services that they need while they're in school. And I think a lot of it too has to do with the fact that these kids are in denial. Like, I work with a lot of them and they're like, I don't have any problems. I don't have any issues. And so when you have them saying, I don't have any issues, the schools, there's no supports. They're not providing them the supports because sometimes they don't know that they need those supports. So.
Okay.
We can
Thanks,
probably
guys.
take another. We can probably
Do you
take
want to
another
take
two
one more
questions.
question quick,
Sure,
or do you
sure.
want to get back on?
Yeah, let's do another question.
Okay. Next one comes from Veronica, and she's asking, what is the racial breakdown of individuals in North Carolina juvenile justice system?
I don't have that information directly in front of me, but I know from a national perspective, it's usually, well, it can vary. It can vary. Usually it's 40%, 50%. You know, again, when African-American population is about, what, 13, 14%, you know, usually they represent half to 60% of the population in the criminal justice system. Now that's going from probation, going to the county jails, going to the state jails and the federal system. So sorry to give a vague answer, but it is a very high percentage compared to the general population. Again, North Carolina specifically, Kimberly, I had talked about trying to address questions that folks have that we aren't able to answer right now offline. So probably have like a Q&A session, afterwards to be able to address that specific issue. So we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll have Heidi and Beth hang on to those questions. We'll have another question pit stop, as it were, but at the end too, we want to be able to make sure that we have an hour and a half session. We're going to probably do hour and 5 minutes of the information, but we want to have a good question session as well at the end, because hopefully this is causing people to think about, you know, what questions do you have? What am I not necessarily prepared to deal with in regards to working with this population? And I think one thing I've found is when I started working with the systems, a lot of VR counselors had a lot of fear, had a lot of concern, you know, and uncertainty. And that's understandable. That's normal, because a lot of these individuals, they're not in the system because of their good behavior. So there's some challenges that these individuals have. But I can say this, when you have a collaboration of partners together to work with that individual, it makes it a much more successful situation for that person. You involve the families, you involve the probation officer, you involve any caseworkers that are set up by the juvenile justice system, you involve corrections officers, you involve the development facility staff. You'll find that when you have that host of team members, it makes a situation much more amenable and not so scary. So my suggestion to you is partner, partner, partner. That's how you get through the concern. That's how you get through the fear, and that's how you get the success going for the individuals. So moving on to the next slide. Not sure why there's a delay there. Sorry, folks. There we go. Sorry about that. We're moving deeper. You know, we did some high level stuff, national stuff. We did some just a quick brush of some states. We're going to dig a little deeper in North Carolina, and finally we're going to get deep into Pennsylvania. So a few things about the juvenile justice system in North Carolina. Again, these are probably things that are very similar across states. And you'll find as you do some research in your own state, you'll find that there are probably some similarities, probably some differences. Now, the juvenile justice system in North Carolina, they work with justice-involved youth 17 years and younger. In Pennsylvania, it's 21 years and younger. So it does vary from state to state. There's a 5-year difference. So again, knowing what your state system covers. Now, again, these are people that are adjudicated. They're in rehabilitation. Now, if they're tried as an adult, 18 and older, it's going to be a criminal charge. So again, knowing your population, knowing who you're going to be approaching and what challenges or barriers they face is very important. Now, the system takes a rehabilitation versus punitive approach. Again, every juvenile justice system across the country is in the same fashion. It's about rehabilitation. It's about restoring the individual as opposed to punishing them. And in North Carolina, they support about 600 community programs throughout the state. So again, there's funding that's going out there that they're providing. So if you can collaborate with them to either braid funding, or the juvenile justice system can do these things, whereas you cannot do these things because of federal restrictions. Kimberly was going to talk about what the juvenile justice system was able to cover in regards to transportation, for example. So again, they can be a very powerful partner if you have such needs as transportation, funding for transportation, or having transportation provided. They can provide that. And lastly, they collaborate with more than 1,400 people through a variety of nonprofit organizations to provide community programming to youth. So again, it isn't about the criminal aspect of it or the punitive aspect of it, but it's about restoring the individual and connecting them to the community. So again, they are a critical partner of the juvenile justice system to be able to connect you to the individual and connect to services that you may not be able to fund, but they can. So again, an example of what is happening at the county level. So again, we're getting lower and lower down to the county level. In North Carolina, there is the Juvenile Crime Prevention Councils, the JCPCs, and they're all in all counties, 100 counties within North Carolina. They meet monthly, and the State Division of Adult Correction and Juvenile Justice funds $22 million statewide to these programs for treatment, counseling, rehabilitation services. Hopefully that sounds familiar. Again, if you can partner with these organizations and get to know and be a part of the county level juvenile justice prevention councils. In Pennsylvania, they're called the CJABs, the County Justice Advisory Boards. Again, County Justice Advisory Boards. I sat on the state level board that oversaw those counties, and we issued grants, issued funding to those county programs for rehabilitation purposes for juveniles. Now, I was going to try and pull up the web page on this, but for some reason, of course, it always happens. 10 minutes before we're to go live, this stopped working. But I wanted to show an example of something, again, many states do have already, many counties already have a booklet or a resource document that you can look at that gives you like a point of contact, gives you the types of services that are available, gives you the address of where the service is available, probably a phone number, a website. What is really nice for folks in North Carolina, you can look at this. If you go on this website, it's under the Department of Public Services, Department of Corrections. It has under the Juvenile Justice section, you can select a county. So I can't do it right now. Like I said, for some reason, the links just stopped working. But every county that is in North Carolina, and again, it's something that's in Pennsylvania, it's something probably likely in every state. You look at the county and it provides information on what are resources, like who's the point of contact for that county for juvenile justice issues. And I want to talk lastly about diversionary programs. And what they are is if a person comes before the court, which they will do, it helps to direct them away from going deeper into the system. Instead of creating a pipeline to the adult system, it's diversionary. It diverts them from that path. And there are 5 programs like this in North Carolina, the misdemeanor program. The 6th program was in Orange County, but they moved it up to 18 older and pre-arrest. And basically what that does, these programs do is they look at low-risk youth, keeping youth out of the adult criminal system, again, breaking that pipeline. The eligible youth are referred by law enforcement to the MDB program. And upon successful completion, the youth is released without having an arrest record or an adult criminal history. That is so critical, folks. You know, to say on a job application, they do not have a criminal record. That is so powerful. So look for your diversionary programs, your court diversionary programs in your state. In Pennsylvania, I think we have like 32 in our 67 counties. Some are juvenile, many are adult, some are veterans, some are mental health, some are substance abuse, but there are diversionary programs in many states, if not all states. Look for your diversionary program. Again, that's a touch point where you can come in and make connection to that system because they're being diverted to what? If you or there is a resource to be what they're diverted to, that's a powerful thing. So turn it over, Kimberly.
Yep. Our polling question number 3. And I see there are some people having issues, and I apologize for that. So those of you that can participate, please do. So are adjudicated youth included in the WIOA regulations? 1 is yes, and 2 is no.
And we'll give about another 20 seconds. Hit those buttons, folks. Okay, I think we have a good number here. And it looks like 84% said yes and 16% said no. So Kimberly, I'll let you take it from here.
So next slide, Randy. So pre-employment transition services are required to be provided to students with disabilities. This does include students that are in juvenile justice facilities. So the actual reg is 361.5 C51. And in the comment section of the regs, it says students in post-secondary education should be included within the definition, as should students in GED, ESL, homeschool, vocational technical programs, and juvenile justice or mental health treatment facilities. So the juvenile justice system, they are included in the WIOA regs. And so the final rule that came down was they revised the definition of student with disability. So the final ruling came down to include students in secondary, post-secondary, and other recognized education programs. So those students that are in the juvenile justice facilities do fall into those other recognized education programs, and they are included in the new WIOA regs that happened in 2014. So the next slide, Randy.
I'm sorry.
Other way. So Randy has alluded to this throughout our presentation about Pennsylvania. We did a statewide initiative. We have an MOU with the Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services and OVR. And as Randy said earlier, there was those reinvestment of detention saving money. BJJS had some money that they were going to lose. So they invested it in, with OVR, we were actually able to pull down some federal dollars. The total of all of this, when it's all said and done, if we haven't been able to match the entire thing, but there is the potential to match up to $3.1 million. So
And that's per year, right?
yes. So it is a 5-year MOU. This MOU began in 2017. So we're only 3 years into the MOU. There's been a lot of changes that have happened. We provide many services. As you can see, the services that we do provide are group and individual. I will say that a lot of the services that we do provide are those group services to the potentially eligible. We do have a few that are doing individual, but for the most part, it is those group services. So we'll get into a little bit more detail about the BJJS system and who we're actually serving under the MOU on the next slide. But a little bit about who we did serve in that first year of that MOU. We had a research group that did some statistics for us, and we were actually able to serve 750 students in the Pact affiliates. And 82% of those were students that were in 11th grade or below. So we were pretty happy with those statistics. Since we started the MOU, this has been a work in progress. And in July 1st of 2019, we actually amended the MOU because when the first MOU got written, we were only working with the delinquent youth. So we opened it up, and now we're working with both the delinquent and the dependent youth. So it's allowing us to serve a whole lot more students, and it also makes it easier on the backside because sometimes in these facilities there's delinquent and dependent, and so it was very hard to distinguish who was who. So it's allowed us to touch more students, and it just makes it easier for the facilities on the other side.
Actually, two things, if I can, Kimberly, before we move on. I saw several people raise their hand.
Okay.
Heidi, Beth, is there anything that people had questions about in this regard? I saw a bunch of hands shot up at the same time.
Somebody did ask what BJJS stands for.
Okay.
Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services. And then the other thing that we're going to talk about with Pennsylvania is the transfer document that was developed. This has taken a lot of work, and there's been a lot of sweat, blood, tears, and love that's been put into this document, and we'll get to that at the end.
Well,
Next slide.
Well, I'm sorry, I just want to say quickly too, Memorandum of Understanding is what the MOU stands for, and OVR is Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. But we'll be talking in more detail about what a Memorandum of Understanding is and how important it is between organizations to be able to have consistent services, consistent policies, consistency across geographic areas, consistency across professionals within different agencies. It's a critical component to have consistency so that Sally Sue or Johnny Smith are getting the same services, whether they're in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or, across Pennsylvania. So I just wanted to say that.
So these are the partners that are in that MOU. And as you can see, OVR, the Pennsylvania Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, and then the BJJS, it's there as the Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services. So here in Pennsylvania, within the Bureau of Juvenile Justice, they have Pact affiliates. You'll hear me say that. That's the Pennsylvania Academic, Career, and Technical Training affiliates. Those are the ones that we are pinpointing through this MOU. And on the next slide, you'll see it'll go into a little bit more detail, and you'll see exactly why we've decided to use the Pact affiliates for this MOU. So here in Pennsylvania, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, we are housed under the Department of Labor and Industry. The Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services, they're actually housed in the Department of Health. So you have
Human Services, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Human Services, sorry. I said health, you're correct. So I'm sure most of you can already see you have two different bureaus housed under two different organizations. And like Randy's been saying this entire time, we're trying to collaborate. So it's taken a lot of work because not only do we have our OVR rules, BJJS has their rules, and to try to make this MOU work and make everybody's rules work together, it's taken a lot. And so to try to get out of those styles, it was a matter of us understanding their system and a matter of them understanding our system to make this work, and trying to figure out where we could put our services and where all of this could work. So in the Bureau of Juvenile Justice, in the Pact facilities, there's about 4,000 students on an average that are in their facilities. So that's the potential that we have to work with. And out of those 4,000 students that they have in their facilities, about half of those students either go back to Philadelphia or they go back to Pittsburgh. That's the largest population. The rest of them are scattered throughout the entire state.
And actually, if I can just say one thing in that regard, Kimberly brings up a very good point. You'll find that whether it's the juvenile justice system or the adult criminal system, their perspective on geography, their perspective on safety and what they need to see done for the behalf of the individual and them serving their time has nothing to do with what the community needs in regards to. They might send the person as far as possible away from where the individual lives. They might send them over to Erie, Pennsylvania, which is just south of the Lake Erie from Philadelphia. And it really bungs things up because the local community services that are around Erie at that state prison are not what are in Philadelphia. So trying to make that connection to community services and supports may not be as ideal as possible. So that's why it's important to have this MOU and have the same, be on the same page in regards to, okay, what's going to happen next, so that no steps are missed, nothing's dropped, no balls are dropped on behalf of that individual. Sorry, go ahead, Kimberly.
So I was going to say too, so the BJJS, there are a lot of facilities that are not part of the Pact. The Pact is something that's voluntary for them to do. The best thing that I can relate it to is the STARS program with daycare centers. So if anybody has any, well, this is here in PA, so we have a STARS system, and so daycare centers can obtain between 1 to 5 stars. So the higher the star rating. So it's something that they voluntarily do. Not every daycare has to do it. It's just like the Bureau of Juvenile Justice Facilities. This is something that they volunteer to be involved in. I do have the link to the Pact website, which has got a lot of the resources and a lot of the things that we'll be talking about. It is there so that you can access the Pact website. It's also on the references page at the end so that you can access that after the presentation. So in PA, there are only 68 Pact facilities currently. 6 of those are state facilities. And then those are a whole nother can of worms, because it being one state agency and another state agency, there's certain things that we can and can't do with them. So more on that. So let's start, Randy, let's go to the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these Pact facilities. So here's where you're going to see the overlap in where we had to figure out where we could mesh with them. So the Pact, they actually have competencies that they have to work on. The 5 domains are here: career awareness and exploration, job search skills, job retention and career advancement, life skills, personal and social development skills. As you can see, those are very, very similar to the pre-employment transition services language, and looking at the same things. So what we had to do is figure out, because they're required to do those services, we had to figure out how can we put this on steroids, so to speak? How can we give them above and beyond what they're already getting, and enhance their programs? And so that's what we started exploring with all of these Pacts across the state. On that Pact website, this employability and soft skills competency, there's a manual on there which will have all of this spelled out. And underneath those 5 domains are 27 competencies that they work on. They don't have to achieve all of them. The whole idea is that the Pact creates a portfolio for each student that goes with them. So if they move facilities, that portfolio goes with them. That information goes with them. I'm sure all of you out there have heard a kid say, I already did this. I already did this at the last facility I was in. So where this makes it a great for these kids is they're not constantly having to repeat the same thing that they did. You know, when they go from one facility to the next, you know what they've learned because it's all documented. It's in their portfolio. So they know that they've already received those competencies. So if they get into another facility, they know that they don't need to work on that competency because it's already been completed, and they can work on other competencies. So it allows the kid to keep growing and keep building versus staying stagnant and constantly learning the same thing over because nobody knows what this kid did. So that portfolio is very important because later when I talk about the transfer document, it's going to tie into this. So some of you were asking about statistics. I can't say about other states, but we actually have Juvenile Courts Judges Commission. It's called JCJC. Again, there's a link in your reference pages to the whole report. This is only the statistical highlights page from it. The report's probably about 200 pages, and it does talk about all the PA juvenile justice statistics. Somebody was asking about race and ethnicity. The second box on the bottom, it does talk about total dispositions by Black and ethnicity. It's kind of hard to read, but so there are statistics out there. And like I said, if you go onto the JCJC website, you could look and pull this up. There's a lot of good statistics, and it's definitely good information to know and know the population that you're working with when you're going into some of these agreements and looking to do MOUs. You need to know your statistics. As you can see, from 2017 to 2018, everything is down, and even from 2014 to 2018, our numbers are down, which is really good to see here in Pennsylvania.
Okay, our last question for folks to poll is how many children in the United States are abused or neglected? Excuse me, is it A, 9.2 in 500, B, 9.2 in 1,000, C, 9.2 in 2,000, or D, 9.2 in 5,000? So we'll just take a moment and have you folks go through that. And we'll just take a few more seconds because we want to make sure we get through all the material in time for us to get to the question section. So we'll end this in about 3 seconds here. Okay, so most people are saying 9.2 and 5,000. Actually, the answer is 9. I'm sorry, 500. I'm sorry, 9.2 and 500. Actually, the answer is 9.2 and 1,000. So a National Institute of Justice funded study found that experiencing childhood abuse and neglect, increases the likelihood of arrest as a juvenile by 53% and as an adult by 38%, and committing a violent crime by 38%. So the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the federal funding source for many of the juvenile activities that are down at the state level. That study from that organization found that adolescents from families reporting multiple forms of violence are more than twice as likely as their peers from nonviolent homes to report committing violent offenses. So again, abuse may be very much in a wheelhouse of the family, very much in a wheelhouse of the individual. Trauma, trauma-informed care is something that's very a buzzword these days. It's real. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but statistics show that about 90% of the juveniles that are in juvenile development facilities indicate having experienced one trauma, if not more, in their lifetime. So again, 90% of individuals in juvenile development facilities have indicated experiencing trauma. So it's something that, again, there's layers. It's like onions, kind of like Shrek talks about the onions in the first Shrek movie. You have to pull apart the layers to find out what's going on in the life of that individual and get to the real. There may be much emotional scar tissue that's built up over the years that the person isn't willing to break open or pull open wounds. So how can you work collaboratively with your partners to be able to address those issues on top of dealing with trauma? So let's go ahead and shut this poll out, and we'll go ahead and
Randy, I just wanted to say I did see some comments coming in the chat box, and people saying that it was 9 point. They felt that it was probably higher. I will say that this statistic does come from the U.S. Office of Justice Programs. It was a 2018 statistic. It was the most recent one that they had done. And yes, with the current times, I'm sure in a couple of years from now, you're probably going to see a spike in this. I would not be surprised.
And again, it's one of those things where now that we're starting to assess for that, we're starting to see that, and we'll probably find, as folks had indicated, over time, those numbers are going to rise because there's more precise assessment of that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the group services that Pennsylvania does provide are listed here. So we have the instruction in self-advocacy, independent living skills, the job exploration, workplace readiness, group travel, and group shadowing. So in the BJJS facilities, predominantly the three areas that I see group services being conducted in is in the instruction and self-advocacy, the independent living skills, and the workplace readiness training. Those are pretty much the three main groups that we do provide inside the facilities. Those are either provided by our staff internally, or sometimes we have a provider that is willing to work with our BJJS facilities, and they will go in and they will provide these group services to the potentially eligible students that are in those facilities. And again, as Randy had mentioned earlier, in Pennsylvania, a student the max that they can be in the Pact is up to the 21st birthday, and which our services are for 14 to 21. So they could be maxing out at 21 and still receiving services as long as they haven't received their high school diploma. Next slide. So these are the individual services that we provide through PETS here in Pennsylvania. The community work instruction, we have job shadowing, The paid work experiences, student stipends, identifications, student stipend admin fee. We have an indoor and an outdoor fee that we do. So predominantly the two big ones that we use with the BJJS facilities is the paid work experience and the student stipend. So there are a couple of facilities that we do have that became PETS providers, and they're able to provide these work experiences inside a couple of our residential facilities. Those students are receiving a wage through PETS, and they are actually able to pay their fines off prior to leaving the facility, or at least pay most of them off. So it's been a really good collaboration. It's giving that kid that work experience before they leave. It's giving them something that they can put on their resume that they did. So we do a little bit of the indoor and outdoor fees, just depending on the facility. But it's more so the paid work experience and the student stipends. These services are provided in a case that has been opened. So the student has to open up a case and has to be in O2 status in order for us to be able to provide these services.
Just
Yes,
a quick
Randy.
comment. I saw a lot of folks raise their hand during the slides. So is there anything, Heidi or Beth, that needs to be addressed at this time? Any burning questions?
I don't see any burning questions in the Q&A right now. In the chat, there's a couple. It says, are they allowed to get a reference from successfully completing those internal WEs?
They can put it on the resume that they did that job. I would think that it would be up to the facility as to whether they actually wanted to write a letter of reference for them. But yeah, they can at least put that paid work, because it was a paid work experience. So they're actually able to put that on their resume.
And then one more, this is actually going back a couple of slides.
Okay.
When you were talking about some of that childhood trauma, someone asked, what are some of the services available to help deal with the emotional childhood trauma that you referred to in earlier slides?
Well, I know just quickly, for the sake of time, I'll answer that question quickly, but I'll jump back over so Kimberly can finish your part of the session. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, the adult system, they had each and every one of their staff, 16,000 individuals, corrections officers, cooks, folks that were across the employment spectrum for the Department of Corrections. They put them all in a 2-year period through what's called mental health first aid. So it's a day-long training on how to address issues of trauma, how to see signs of trauma, how to approach a person in a way that isn't inducing more trauma. So there are programs out there. I know that Kimberly went through the training herself, mental health first aid. I'm hoping to go through the training myself. So keep an eye out for mental health first aid training. That's a great training to help identify trauma, but also to be able to reduce trauma that the person might be currently experiencing. So that's something that I can think of off the top of my head. But in regards to what's available, I would reach out to your juvenile justice system, to the county probation office, and say, what are they doing in regards to addressing trauma? Their counseling staff, or their probation officer staff are constantly being trained, and they likely have trained in motivational interviewing, which is another great tool in regards to helping a person deal with issues and find solutions that are their own, not something that's told to them. So those are the things I can think of off the top of my head. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Kimberly.
Go ahead and go to the next slide, Randy. So summer programs. So this is one of the areas that it's taken us a while to get here. And one of the areas that we've really thought about out of the box, and how do we put PETS services on steroids. Goes under our workplace readiness training. And the partners that it took to make this happen were us, OVR, the local community colleges, BJJS and their Pact affiliates. So the first year we actually did a program with one of the local community colleges, and we had 2 community-based providers, Pact affiliates, come to the table. We were actually able to send their students, because they were community-based, to a college campus for 2 weeks for a summer program to learn about all of the different entry-level college certification programs that they could obtain when they were out of there. They looked at the programs such as like the CDL training. They looked at like some carpentry, some plumbing, some more of those littler programs, the vocational technology programs that they could get a certification in a very short period of time that could give them sustaining wages. The second year, some of the facilities found out about this and wanted to do this. So the second year we expanded and we actually went into a residential facility. So we actually took the college to the facility and were able to provide them with a 2-week program up there. There have been lots of challenges. There's been lots of things to work through, especially when you're talking about a high secure prison facility, basically. Getting all those logistics worked out of being able to have this college come in and run this program for 2 weeks. Every year it has grown. We keep having new facilities coming on. Every year we have new colleges coming on and new universities wanting to partner with us. The second year around, we added 2 more universities, several more facilities. We're looking again for next year. We're already starting to have conversations with the community college in Philadelphia to be able to provide programs out there. Unfortunately, this year, due to COVID-19, we were not able to pull any of these programs off. The colleges are just trying to maintain their students, but we're looking to do some stuff again next summer. This program has grown every single year. Like I said, we keep adding more facilities on, we keep adding more colleges on. This has been a really great experience. And this comes to collaboration. So the second year we did it, we started having discussions about, what went right, what went wrong, how could we improve this program? And one of the things that we were in our conversations that we started talking about was the fact of, the kids were bringing their lunch from their facility. They were eating their lunch, blah, blah, blah. We're like, how can we incorporate like them being able to actually eat lunch on a college campus? And we're not able to, through PETS, to be able to provide food. So BJJS actually, between the 2 of us, we paid for the program for them to be there, and BJJS actually paid for them to each have a voucher every single day while they were there. So they actually got to go through they were on the college campus. They actually got to go through the line. They got to have that whole college experience. And I did attend the program for several days, and it was really neat to see these kids grow. It was really neat to watch them interact in these programs that they were learning stuff, and then to actually have that college experience. Because I think a lot of these kids don't realize that this is even potentially, they could even do this. And a lot of them, after these programs were over, were like, I could really do this. Like, I can really go to college. And so their eyes were really open to the potential that they could go to college. They could do this. And they've never had anybody in their life really kind of encourage this or explain this to them. So it's just been a really, really awesome program. It's been really awesome to watch these kids grow through these summer programs and see that potential in themselves. So next slide. So the transfer document. So in order for all of this to work, we had to create a transfer document. Oh, well, that's what we keep calling it. It's actually been labeled the Pact Affiliates OVR Guidance for Coding, Opening, and Transferring Cases is its official name. So what we've done is we actually created an entire document. It's about 18 pages long, that actually walks a case all the way through the system, all the way through OVR, through Pact, back to OVR, to so it takes the case from beginning to end of what everybody needs to do. So it was a collaboration between Bureau of Juvenile Justice and OVR of what are all the steps, what needs to happen, So it's taken quite a long time to get this document to where we have it today. But it just goes to show that collaboration and people working together as a team, because like I said, not only does it tell my staff what to do and how to do it, but it also, the Pact affiliate, like what do they need to do and when do they need to do it. So some of the information that it covers is it talks about Pact affiliate information and where it's located.
I just want to say, Kimberly, sorry, I didn't mean to break in because I know we're running short on time, but I did want to say that folks that are on the webinar, this is a gem document. This is such a critical tool to the success of two agencies within two state departments working collaboratively together. So this is something that is now a public document. You know, if it's something that you would be interested in talking to Kimberly about, I'm sure that she'd be glad to discuss it with you. But this was a lot of blood, sweat, and now I'm calling cheers, because it's able to take, as she said, one individual through two systems and help them towards their path to success. Sorry, continue.
No. So it talks about cases with the Bureau of Blind and Visual Services. We defined everything. So not only do our staff know, but so do Bureau of Juvenile Justice, and we're working off of the same definition, because the way we define a student is not the same way that Juvenile Justice defines a student. So we had to be clear as to, for this purpose, this is what the definition is. We talk about coding so staff can code their time appropriately. We go down detail of how a staff person is to do an authorization in an open case versus a potentially eligible, because those are two different processes. Go ahead, go to the next slide. Then we get into single points of contact. So there's single points of contact for OVR. There's single points of contact at the Pact affiliates. We have in there about the release of information. I've been working with the Pacts across the state. If you could just put the PETS release of information in your intake packet as best practices, this is going to help expedite a student being able to receive services. Sometimes they're not in services for very long. It may only be a couple of months. So to have to try to get, after they've been there, you've decided now they need PETS services, but now we need to backtrack to get a release. It was delaying things. And so a lot of the Pact affiliates are like, hey, yeah, this is great. So the other thing is, it talks about how a Pact refers an OVR to individual services. So it goes through the processes. It teaches them that. So at least the Pact knows, like, hey, where is a case in the system? What's happening on OVR's side? It even talks about out of state, like Randy was saying, you know, sometimes these kids come from far distances, and it shows them what they need to do for an out of state case. Go on to the next one, because I know we're running out of time. So the last one is, we have what we call a BJJS MOU identifier. So basically in our system where our cases are housed, we actually have the case manager or the VRC will go in and they check off that they edit the case details, they check off and they identify that this student is receiving services in a BJJS facility. That we talk about discharge. So at discharge, and this is where I was talking earlier about that portfolio. So this is where it's really important, because what we've done is we've created templates. So if a student is in a Pact facility, maybe they've received some group services in there by a provider. OVR really probably doesn't know, like a case man or counselor doesn't really know about it, but the Pact knows which services that they receive because they're there. They can put that information in that portfolio. So again, that information is being transferred, not only the stuff that's going on with the Pact and the competencies that they're working on, OVR's information is also being housed into that portfolio, and that information is going to be transferred with that student. So not only when they leave that facility, not only do they know, but then OVR knows. So it goes to another facility, another office is working with that student. Now that OVR counselor can come in there, they can see that portfolio and know what services that student has received. And so again, it's stopping that duplication of services.
And can I just say something, Kimberly, if I can? Just a quick comment on some of the things that are listed there. The CWDS is the Commonwealth Workforce Development System.
Yes.
It's the OVR data system. And also the DO is the district office. So it's a regional office of the VR program in Pennsylvania. But I did want to say too that Kimberly is so right in regards to the information being transferred. So again, we talked about the Oklahoma model some time ago about how the VR counselor follows the life of the case for the individual. But in Pennsylvania, that's not the situation. So this transfer document, again, I can't mention enough how much of a gem of a document this is. So you're a state that doesn't follow the individual life of the case. You know, as an individual goes from one geographic area to another counselor might take on the case based on the geography. This is a great document for those states that have that situation to be able to know, well, how do we put all the pieces together? Kimberly and her team did such an excellent job, and I don't mean to just praise upon her, but it's a gem, folks. It's something that really I suggest if you want an example of it, talk to Kimberly about getting this so that you know, okay, well, if we're working with this population, if we're working with these agencies, how do we make those connections? Sorry, go ahead.
No, the biggest thing that I can say, and it talks about the second to last bullet, is transferring the cases. So like, how does that process look? Like, one DO, is it staying in that district office or is it going to another district office? Like, so it walks everybody through that step. Not only does it tell our staff, but it also tells the Pact, like, hey, this is what's going to be happening to this case. So it keeps everybody on the same page. The biggest thing that I can tell you about this is, like, when you're looking at developing something like this, you need to look at all of the details. You need to look at all of the costs that are in play. You need to look at every little detail of that case and what's going to happen to it, how it's going to happen. The details is imperative in this. It's the only way that it works, is the details.
Well,
it's
and
the little things.
I'm sorry, Kimberly, I'm going to jump to the our questions slide,
Yes.
but actually I'm going to do one
That's
thing.
it.
I'm going to slide past the slide and just talk about the Youth Technical Assistance Center. It's a national TA center that is RSA funded. And I wanted to mention, I actually worked for the organization about 1.5 years ago. If you want more resources on working with youth with disabilities who are homeless, out of school, involved in juvenile justice, or minorities, or unemployed, this is a great resource. And the logo actually has a link to the website. So if you have this PowerPoint presentation, if you click on the YTech logo, it'll take you to that website, and it'll give you a lot of great national resources on dealing with these various populations that are listed. So let's go back to the questions page. Whoops. Let's go back to the questions page. And now it's time. I know we kind of said a lot of things about a lot of states and a lot of programming. But what are the questions, folks? So Beth and Heidi, if you can share the questions. We have about 11 minutes, I think. So we'll try and squeeze those all in. Anything we don't answer, we'll definitely provide a Q&A fact or sheet afterwards.
Yeah, so just like Randy said, like all of our other webinars, if we don't get to your question, we will still answer it. We'll just send them to Kimberly and Randy after this webinar ends, and they'll answer it, and we'll post it on our website. So keep out an eye for those. And I do have a quick housekeeping thing before we jump into questions, just if there are people who have to jump off early. If you're in need of CRC for today's webcast, Heidi will be adding a link to the chat box. She may have added it already. That contains steps to request the CRC. You can also find that information on our webcast page within our website at projecte3.com. Additionally, if you're registered for this webinar, you'll receive an email tomorrow with these instructions. If you have any questions at all about CRCs, please direct those to projecte3pc@gmail.com. Again, questions go to projecte3pc@gmail.com. And we have automated that process, so it should come a lot faster than it has previously. So now we will jump into questions. All right, the first one comes from Matthew. The question is, has any state that you have shown been more successful in decreasing recidivism rates for youth?
Well, I would say that a lot of this, believe it or not, is relatively new in these connections. As I mentioned about the New York model, for example, that community of practice hasn't even started yet. They're just in the planning stages. So I know that probably the best data we have is what Kimberly had mentioned earlier about the 750 individuals that receive services. So again, unfortunately, as with anything, as we develop programs, as we fund programs, as we track the data on those programs, we have to analyze the data afterwards. So I know that Kimberly had mentioned there's a third party that's working with the Bureau of Juvenile Justice Services in Pennsylvania that's tracking the data. Is Kimberly, there anything you can tell us in regards to any data on recidivism right now, or is it too early to tell because of the newness of the program?
It's probably too early to tell. I will say that it's been very, very difficult because there's only so much information that we can release and the information that they need, and to be able to put it in a aggregate data that both of us could use. It's been very, very difficult to try to get those numbers. And I will say that a lot of it falls in that potentially eligible area. So that's where we're doing most of our work, which those kids are not tracked in our system. So only the ones that open up an actual case would we actually be able to do any type of tracking with.
Well, in regards to the folks from Oklahoma, they've been doing it probably longer than anyone else. I can reach out to my colleagues in Oklahoma and find out if they have answers to that question, but it's not something I can answer here and now. But I definitely will work on seeking the answer to that question. That's a great question, because at the end of the day, we want to figure out, is what we're doing mattering? Does it mean something in the lives of these individuals? Or is it just one more program that they have to go through? And, you know, once they're out of that program, they're on to something else. So great question.
Right. The next one comes from Millyanne. What do you think is the cause of only 46% of youth receiving educational services while in detention centers, as opposed to 100% of them?
Probably excuse me, my thought on that is probably just people are misdiagnosed, or, as I said, you know, they're addressed as having bad behavior. You know, they're just not in the rehabilitation system per se. They're not, maybe they didn't get what they needed in the schooling system. Again, I'm not knocking the schooling system, but maybe it's something that, you know, we're going to be talking about this in the adult system discussion this afternoon. A lot of individuals have brain injury starting from, you know, 13, 14-year-olds that go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. So, and it's a very high percentage of individuals that are in the criminal justice system that have brain injury. We didn't even address that. And it could be something of misdiagnosis. You know, the person is displaying behavior that doesn't match up with their disability. So it could be a variety of reasons. I guess the best thing I can tell you is I don't exactly know why, but I know that unless we partner, those types of statistics will probably continue to exist in those systems. And that's why we need to be there, to be able to increase those numbers, increase awareness of the professionals that are in those systems, increase assessment that is available to the individuals in these systems, and being able to create a more successful outcome, getting the services they need it when they need it based on what their needs are identified as. So that's I can tell you in that regard. Next question.
And the next one comes from Mike from Maine. Regarding adjudicated youth and their reintegration, re-engagement planning, what are some powerful enrichment opportunities that juveniles, disabled or not, could be engaged with outside of their daily programming? This would be during their time in a secured residential community where they receive educational and social work supports.
Kimberly, did you want to take that one? You want to take a stab at that?
Ask it again. I'm not quite sure what he's asking.
It looks like he's asking about juveniles that are in a secured residential community. What are some enrichment opportunities that they could engage in outside of their regular programming?
So that's where one of the residential facilities that we do have, they actually are employing those kids. So they're actually being able to have a paid work experience while they're in a residential facility. I'm hoping that that's what he's asking for. So, I mean, to me, that's an enrichment. That's going above and beyond what they're able to do. Sometimes the PETS services are provided like after their regular school day.
Well, and I'm thinking too, I mean, you mind if I jump in on this, Kimberly?
Go ahead.
I'm thinking too, like maybe inviting brothers and sisters, big brothers and big sisters rather, or some civic organization to come and do programming at these facilities, volunteer organizations. I think that's maybe kind of where he's reaching at. But as Kimberly mentioned before, just a reminder, the local community college is going in and providing community college courses funded by VR at a local development facility center not far from our state capital, Harrisburg, about 35 minutes out. So I think it's thinking creatively, thinking outside of the box, but I think what is the best thing I can suggest is reaching out to those facilities, reaching out to professionals that are running those facilities, having those conversations about what types of resources have they done or outreach to the community have they done to bring those services in. So looking at it from the outside, that's probably not the best thing to do. Talk to the professionals that are in those programs and find out what they've already done, what they're interested in. Maybe you can make a connection to a resource that they don't already have a connection to.
The one thing that I participated in one of the facilities, it was actually one of the state facilities that we have here, is they did a financial reality fair. And so that was really interesting to be there. They had different stations that the kids had to go around. They were given a job, they were given a budget. So they actually had to figure out, like, am I going to get an apartment? Am I buying a house? Can I afford a card? Am I using public transportation? Do I get to go to dinner? Like, they actually had to take their budget and they had to go to each one of these stations and buy stuff and look at, you know, am I renting furniture? Am I purchasing furniture? Like, so it was just very interesting to see them walk through that whole process of, like, what is it really like with spending money.
And it looks like we could probably take, like, I'm sorry, Kimberly, were you done? It looks like we could probably take time for 2 more questions.
All right. The next one is, what are the success rates in the VR system?
Success rates as far as students. I will say in PA, this is just for me, is once the case is open, they are very hard to locate. They're very hard to track. So I honestly, I would have to say that it's very poor. And one of the things that I've had discussions with BJJS about is the fact that these kids are young, and think about where you were at when you were 16, 17, 18 years old. Would this have been your priority? No, it probably wouldn't have been my priority either. They want to be with their friends. They want to do things. So my intention with all of this is planting seeds. They may not grow right away. I feel like that it's going to take several years for some of those seeds to plant, but they at least have been exposed to OVR. They've been exposed to colleges. They've been exposed to these programs. They've been exposed to work skills, and those seeds have been planted. And I'm hoping that eventually, it may take a few years, but those seeds will start to grow at some point down the road.
Okay, I think we can do one more question. We're right at the end. But
yeah, actually,
we're at 1:30.
Yeah, there have been a couple requests for some of the materials that you mentioned, like that transfer document, like people asking where you can find that. Do either you want to describe really quickly where you can find that, or would you like to provide a link or something where we can post that with the archive webinar?
Okay, at the moment, I can't release it because there's still we still have some glitches. The embedded documents that we have in it cannot be opened, and so we're trying to work through that. As soon as it is up and live, I can send it to Beth or Heidi, and they can post it with the documents eventually. But it may take several weeks before I can actually get that to you.